Right, good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you to the virtual farm tour sponsored by the American Jersey Cattle Association and National All Jersey Incorporated. A delight to have you all with us today. A little bit of housekeeping before we start the program, and we know about these things, right? So if you wouldn't mind, please get them put on vibrate or silenced or something, or if you want to turn them off, that's quite understandable that you do need to stay connected while the program is going on. Okay? So if we're ready, John. Okay. Today's herd ticks all of the boxes that makes for an engaging virtual farm tour. This is a multi-generation family farm. It is, you're going to see a profitable herd of superior registered cattle that have been developed over many years that are prominent at the shows and sought after at sales. It's going to feature the adoption of practices that support the operation, but also protect the land and the environment. They have a commitment to consumer outreach and education, and they're now looking at setting up the business so that the next generation can make a living in the dairy business. Let's meet today's hosts.
Our farm is an intensive rotational grazing dairy. We send the cows out every day to eat grass. We do feed them some in the barn, but they're housed actually on pasture. We milk about 220 Jersey cows on about 400 acres total with rented and owned land. My family's been in the Jersey business since the early 1900s. In fact, my great-grandmother was one of the first ladies in the state to own a Jersey cow. So I'm actually about the fourth generation in the Jersey business.
I was raised on a dairy farm, my kids were raised on a dairy farm, my husband was raised on one, and there's just no better life than being raised on a farm. The value of raising my kids on the farm is that they learned what it means to take care of animals, what responsibility is.
My earliest memory growing up on a dairy farm is coming out to the barn and feeding calves and breaking cattle to take to the county shows and learning how to take care of the dairy cattle and learning a good work ethic. As I grew older, it just became inevitable that this is what I was going to do, and it's actually what I went to school for. The challenges these days for a dairy farmer is the growing technology. If you're not willing to change, you're going to take 5 steps back instead of 5 steps forward.
We strive to produce the best product that we can possibly produce. And that starts with taking care of the cows, keeping the cows comfortable. We offer the cows shade. They're in the pasture most of the time. We have a vaccination program where we try to ward off any kind of disease or illness. But that's all to try to produce the most wholesome, best dairy product that we can possibly do. Whether it's raining or nasty, every day the cows have to be fed, the cows have to be taken care of. So some days are better than others, but generally, I love being out here.
I do this because it's just something that's bestowed in you that you learn from a young age that you just learn to love.
I'm dedicated to dairy because this is the life I love. I'm Corey Lutz.
I'm Bridget Lutz.
I'm James Pearson.
And
I'm dedicated to dairy. My cows, my milk, and my land.
Please welcome Corey Lutz.
First off, I'd like to start by introducing my family. My wife, Bridget, that you've already heard, grew up on a dairy farm. Our oldest son, James has been working with me at the dairy now since he graduated from college. Our daughter, his wife, Danielle is a school teacher. Olivia is our youngest, and she graduated from NC State and is now working with Farm Credit in their marketing division. And her boyfriend, Danny. Danny has just got he's got an ag degree and just got a job with Pennington Seed. I also would like to introduce my family that's not here. Our middle daughter, Mandy, and her husband and their little boy had planned to be here, but Chris had an accident and broke his leg here about 2 weeks ago and was unable to travel. So this is my family.
Well, thanks, Corey, for agreeing to do the program today, and let's get started.
Okay, as was earlier stated, we've been in the jersey business for a very long time. My grandmother was one of the first people to own a registered jersey cow in North Carolina, and it's been a passion of mine ever since I was a little kid. I just love jerseys. We also, I'd like to this is my mom and dad. This picture was taken probably about 15, 20 years ago. We had just received a award from Farm Bureau, and this was in the Farm Bureau magazine. So my mom and dad have both passed away. This is a picture of my dad and my two brothers. I have 2 brothers and a sister. Starting with me on the end, and the next one is my older brother Wayne, which was in the dairy business, but he was retired here in the last couple of years. Then comes my dad and my younger brother Kevin, that also is in the dairy business. He has a herd of jerseys about 15 miles from our location. We started out in Catawba County. At one time, there were 7 Dutch dairies that were in my father's family. Back in the late 90s, North Carolina came under a lot of waste regulations. And that was the point that we decided to move the dairy to Lincoln County. We had a tract of land down there. Our land in Catawba County was getting pretty close to town, and we was going to have to spend a lot of money there to stay in the dairy business. So I decided to start a new operation in Lincoln County. In 1997, we started construction, and we started out constructing this as an intensive rotational grazing dairy. So the facilities were built for that. This is a picture of our waste pond. That was one of the things, the regulations stated that we had to be able to handle and store waste for long periods of time because of environmental issues. So this was part of that waste plan. What we constructed was a 8 herringbone parlor and the center part of a 6-row freestyle barn. We just didn't put the freestyles in. So, we knew we have a lot of hot weather in the southeast in the summertime, so we knew we had to be able to feed cattle in the shade. So that's why the feeding area was constructed as it is today. The dairy, we farm about 450 acres now. We've got about 350 owned acres on this tract. 3/4 of this land is bordered by the South Fork River, which presents some challenges for environmental stewardship and runoff. And so, being that we do all no-till to try to control runoff and be as environmentally as we can, secure as we can. This is the cows in the feeding barn. We do feed a TMR. We don't feed anything in the parlor. All of their grain and forage that supplement from grass is fed in a TMR in the barn. We graze about 90 acres with the milking herd. That does not include heifer pasture. And a lot of that is in annuals, summer and winter annuals. And we found that we've got to have really high quality forage to produce a lot of milk. Although we're a grazing dairy, we try to strive for high milk production. So we use a lot of annuals in our grazing program. Another challenge is moving cattle. We've got to move cattle twice a day, every day. So we have a lot of stock trails on the farm. They consist of geotextile material and gravel and sand. So regardless of what the weather is, we can keep the cows out of the mud most of the year. These are the cows going from from the feeding barn to the paddocks in the afternoon. It's pretty easy to move cattle back and forth. Cattle are used to having fresh grass when they go out of the barn and fresh TMR when they come back. So it's really just a matter of going to the paddock or the barn and opening the gates, and the cows they know where to go, wherever the stock lane or feet sends them to. Typically, we graze a paddock will range in size from somewhere from 3/4 of an acre to about 1.5 acres, depending on what the height of the grass in there is. Our goal is to feed all of the grass in that paddock in a 12-hour period. So we're sending them on fresh grass every time they go out of the barn. So we have a lot of paddocks throughout the farm, and that's controlled with poly wire, so we can change the size of the paddocks pretty easily.
Okay, that was the view from above. Let's get down on the ground.
These videos were taken last spring. These are cows going out to pasture. Probably our staple on the farm as far as grass is ryegrass. We get the most production out of ryegrass. We're usually grazing ryegrass from about mid-February through about the end of June, depending on the weather. The rotation on ryegrass in the height of its production, we're rotating back on to the same paddock the cows were on about every 7 to 10 days. So it is we're getting a lot of grazings. With 220 cows, we can keep up with about 40 acres of grass during the height of the spring flush. One important aspect to a grazing system is water. We've got about 5,000 feet of water line buried on the farm. These water tanks rotate with the cattle from paddock to paddock. We try to never have cows walk more than about 300 feet from the end of the paddock to their water source. Pretty easy to move those tanks around. It's just a snap coupler and a pressurized system. All of our paddocks, except for our exterior fences, are single wire poly wire. Very easy to move, take down, and put up. That way, when you're reseeding or doing fertilization, very easy to take that wire down and do whatever you want to do, and then reset up your paddocks. Another important issue is shade. So in the summertime, when it starts getting hot, we'll graze the cows early in the morning. Usually about 10, 11 o'clock, we've got to move them to shade somewhere. So we've got shade paddocks set up throughout the farm. Usually those are about 1/2 acre to 3/4 acre of wooded area. And we rotate those kind of like we do the grass. That way, they're not in there day after day, so they're not making a mess. We give that area time to dry out before we house the cows on that area again. We milk at 3 and 3, bring the cows in from the paddock at 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. They have about an hour before starting the milking so they can eat TMR, and then part of the herd can or have access to TMR during the milking process. One other issue is manure management, especially if you're on a paddock every 7 to 10 days. You're not going to get very good utilization of your grass if your manure's not getting gone between rotations. To accomplish this, we really pay attention to our dung beetle populations, and we try not to use any products that are going to kill off those dung beetle populations. When you've got a lot of them out there, they do a really good job of incorporating that manure into the soil between grazings. And so the next time we come back to the paddock, we get a lot higher utilization of what grass is out there. We try to graze the grass down to 3 to 4 inches and try to get the cows back on those paddocks when their grass is about 8 to 10 inches high. So we're keeping that grass in that most vegetative, most nutritious stage. And a lot of our fresh grass samples are testing somewhere between about 30 and 40% protein, depending on the grass and the time of the season. And that changes quite a bit throughout the season. So we've got to constantly adjust our TMR and our supplementation to try to match what they're getting out in the paddocks. One thing I like about the grazing system, as everybody in here knows that's in the dairy industry, one of your highest cost feed sources is protein. That's what we're getting out of our grazing system. So like right now in our ration, we're only feeding about 2 pounds of soybean meal per cow per day. The rest of the protein, besides the bypass that's in the mix, is coming from the pasture. As far as stored forages, we're mostly silage, a mixture of corn silage and small grain. We do occasionally put up all corn silage, so we try to mix baleage with that. So we make quite a bit of baleage in the spring. I mentioned earlier that you got to have high quality forage. We use a lot of alfalfa. We do graze alfalfa during the summer. We're trying to get to the point where we can graze alfalfa once a day all year round. Another issue we have, since we don't feed a lot of forage, especially in the height of the grazing system, is keeping fresh silage. So to have a mixture of corn and small grain, you see this bunker is half full of small grain. We'll push that out to the length of the silo and finish filling that with corn in the fall. That way, when we're feeding through that single bunk, we've got a mixture of both small grain and corn to feed without having two bunks open. A big issue with there, you got to have high quality forage. So we do everything we can as far as covering silos and bunkers to try to keep fresh forage, do a good job packing to have as high quality forage as we possibly can. We do use some BMR corns in our as far as commodities, we usually have a energy source, which is either corn or hominy. That we use for energy. We do feed cottonseed most of the time to try to keep the fiber levels up in the diet. And we use a protein mix that has our minerals and our bypass and everything mixed in that. So we can change those ingredients around to try to match what we're doing in the grazing system to try to keep the diets as close to what we're formulated for as possible. We do, to better utilize our facility, when the cows are out on pasture during the day, we do bring in two groups of dry cows and one group of heifers that are being bred into the dairy facility. That's where they're fed their supplemental feed, whether it's forage or grain. Those heifers that need to be bred, that way it's easy for us to run them through the chute. We do all AI on the cows and the heifers in the herd. The mixture that they just put out was a heifer ration. This is the cow ration. After those cows have finished their TMR and go back out, then the milking herd comes in about 2 o'clock. They have TMR in front of them pretty much the whole time they're in the barn. The only ones that don't have access to it are the ones in the holding pen. We do have ample waters in we've got 4 water stations in the freestall barn, or not freestall, the feeding barn. We don't have the freestalls. This is a pretty simple layout. We've just got double-A herringbone, holding pen, and this feeding area. That's pretty much our facilities for our cattle. As far as manure management, we do have a waste holding pond. Everything's scraped into that. All the water from the parlor, all of that goes into the waste holding pond. And we usually have to empty that about twice a year. We do use that on the cropland more than the pasture because most of the pasture is getting enough nutrients from the cows being out there. So we're only handling about half the manure that we would if we were a total confinement operation. So that really cuts down on our fuel cost and expense of handling and spreading manure. I did mention we don't feed a lot of TMR during the height of the grazing system. We can actually use a smaller size mixture than we would if we were a total confinement if, milking 220 cows. Most of our heifer rations are pretty high small grain. That's what you're seeing on the screen now. We do have a little bit of grain in there, and then we top dress different groups of animals according to what their requirements are on protein and energy. These are the cows coming back into the barn after grazing during the day. These cows, we do, as far as cooling, we don't have fans in our barn because they're not up there that much of the day. We've got a pretty high roof on this barn, as you can see in the video. We get a lot of natural airflow because we're pretty high up on a hill. We do have cooling in the holding pen. We've got fans and misters in there to try to cool cattle. One disadvantage of a grazing system is we've got to have those cows out in the sun, getting them from the shade paddocks to the barn. So we do everything we can to cool them off after we get them up there to the barn to eat TMR and be milked in the afternoons. Summertime, they may stay in a little later in the afternoon until it starts cooling off before we put them back on to pasture. But typically they're going out about 6 to 7 o'clock. We may hold them up till 8 or 9 in the height of the summer to wait till the temperature cools down a little bit. Our parlor is designed, it's a double-A herringbone, very simple. We don't have meters or anything. We do have automatic takeoffs. We've got air gates and a brisket rail. It's designed for one person to milk about 60 cows an hour, and that's about what we can run through the barn. I've got actually 2 milkers. I got one gentleman that milks in the afternoons. You'll see him in the video pushing cows here in a minute. And another guy that milks in the mornings, and then they split the weekends. Got one other employee that you saw on the feed mixer. He does mostly the feeding of the calves and a lot of the feeding of the barn. Me and James do a lot of the crop work, and then we help out with feeding when we need to. This is Jose. He's putting the cows in the holding pen. He's probably the best cow handler as far as being gentle with cows of anybody I've ever been around. Never gets upset. As far as fly control, we do have a lot of issues with fly control, being a grazing system with horn flies. The thing you just saw there in the video was a fly blocker. It's actually got lights and electrocutors in it, so we're able to control flies without having to use pour-ons or sprays or that kind of thing. We do supplement with that when we need to, but the fly blocker does a pretty good job of keeping a lot of the flies off the cows. This is our calf management. Part of our plan was, we sell a lot of breeding stock. So we want to keep every heifer calf alive. We want to do a good job of raising them out, getting them bred early and getting them back into the herd. So we start our baby calves out on hutches on gravel. We found that the gravel keeps the calves really dry. It's really important to calf health. Calves stay on in these hutches somewhere between a month and 6 weeks. Then they're moved to calf barns, which we'll see here in a minute. This video was shot, it's probably about 85 degrees that day, but the calves can get in the hutches and they're fairly cool inside the hutches with the airflow we have around those hutches. We do something a little different on raising our calves. When our calves are about 10 days to 2 weeks old, we start feeding milk once a day. We feed a gallon once a day instead of a half a gallon twice a day. What we found, besides the labor savings, is we get more starter intake earlier, so we're getting more total dry matter in these calves than we were feeding twice a day, so we're getting more rapid growth. After the calves are weaned, they do go out in small groups to be trained to the fence, and we found we like to put them on ryegrass when possible. We can get better gains on these calves feeding them ryegrass and calf starter than any other supplemental feed we've tried, whether it's silage or alfalfa hay or whatever. They really do well on the fresh ryegrass. This is across the road. We got 3 groups of heifers over there. The 2 you're looking at now, the one closest to us, these are heifers that are next to breed. We feed all their supplemental feed in a feed bunk and their grain, and of course they're looked at and counted every day. The heifers on the far side are bred heifers that have been diagnosed pregnant. We do usually keep a bull in there to clean up anything that may slip a calf after they've been diagnosed, but we do 100% AI, using a fair amount of sex semen on especially our heifers, and so a lot of times I end up selling heifers as replacements that are carrying sex semen calves. We do have one more younger group of calves that is not in the video. This is a group of heifers. I told you there's a group of heifers that come up to the barn every day that we're breeding. They are housed on some pasture outside the barn. Most of their ration is grass. We do supplement a little bit of silage and grain into the barn. But we found this works real well as far as bringing those heifers in every day. We can check heat out there in the pasture, and we write down who's in heat. We can run through the chute and AI them and when we get them pregnant, diagnosed pregnant, they go back across the road.
Well, Corey, I think that gives us a real good overview of the operation and how it's set up. A couple of things I'd like to tell the group here, that you've been honored by the North Carolina Soil and Water Conservation group as the Farm Family of the Year earlier, about 2001. You've got a couple of different milk producer, outstanding producer awards, the most recent being in 2013, the Singer Distinguished Producer Award. But one of the things I think was really interesting is in 2011, you hosted the North American Intercollegiate Dairy Challenge. And if you know what that program is, that's where you opened up the farm and let these college students in teams come in and do an evaluation of your operation. So I think what that talks to me or speaks to me about is that you're very interested in ongoing analysis and continuous improvement. So on that theme, what I would like to do is ask Drew Duncan to come forward. Drew is the Assistant General Manager of National Jersey Incorporated, and he's going to talk about a new environmental assessment that he completed with you on the farm earlier this year. And hang on a second, we'll get it up. There you go.
So earlier this spring, I had the pleasure to go to Piedmont Jerseys and do an environmental stewardship evaluation at the farm with Corey. So this program is done through National Milk Producers Federation. It is a part of their farm program, which is Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. So the environmental stewardship tool looks at your greenhouse gas and your energy use associated with your dairy. Now this was developed using a life cycle assessment which looked at 500 dairy farms across the United States to develop a baseline or an estimated average for your greenhouse gas and energy use. So many of you are familiar with the farm programs, I'm sure. The animal care, which is required through co-ops that sell or that belong to the National Milk Farm Program, and antibiotic stewardship and environmental stewardship. And environmental stewardship is a voluntary program that farms can participate in. Animal care you have to do before you can do an environmental stewardship evaluation. So why are we monitoring this? Why are we looking at this? Why are we doing the environmental stewardship module? Compared to 70 years ago, to produce a gallon of milk, we're using 65% less water, 90% less land, and have a 63% smaller carbon footprint. So this is a very positive story for dairy that we need to get out to consumers, and consumers are wanting to know this type of information. They want to see that this is being looked at and being monitored. Many of you probably have seen this image that compared to 1944, a cow today is producing as much milk as 5 cows were. So we have a positive story that we'd like to get out there. Some other beneficial aspects, it looks at your energy use, so you might be able to see, compared to your region, you're using a high amount of energy or a high amount of fuel. You may be able to find categories that you can lower those inputs and provide a better baseline while improving your environmental stewardship. So how this works is there's 5 different categories that go into the data. It's production, energy use, crop production, your feed ration, and how you manage your manure. Now, the data is collected for a 12-month period. It's a consistent year, whatever you decide it to be. It could be from August to August. It's just a 12-month period. Now, Corey, what were some of the forms that you had to go through or find, and how difficult was this to come together?
It really wasn't that bad. We got most of the production information off of PC Dart. I worked with my nutritionist to pull together a lot of the ration information, and we use QuickBooks on our farm for our farm finances, so a lot of the financial stuff was able to pull it directly off of QuickBooks. So it really was not that cumbersome to come up with all of the figures we needed to do this process.
Yeah, National Milk tried to develop a program that would be easy for farmers to do on-site without a lot of data entry. So a lot of assumptions are made in the program to develop your inputs. So how the results come back are in energy use. So it's per pound of fat and protein corrected milk. So on-site energy produced, which Piedmont Jerseys had none. This is an example also. This is not Piedmont's actual results. And it comes out as on-site fuel use and energy used to produce your feed. And also greenhouse gas emissions, on-site manure, on-site fuel use, on-site enteric emissions, and feed production. And here are the 5 regions: across the United States and how that's divided up. So this is the actual data from the survey. This is Piedmont's inputs, and I wanted to show the questions that are through this program and how simple it can be. You want to talk a little bit about your production?
Yeah, you know, we are a intensive rotational grazing. We try to maintain good production. So we have right now about a 18.5 rolling herd average on our herd. We only milk twice a day. The cows are averaging around 61 pounds. We generally range somewhere between 57 and 63. We generally run somewhere between a 4.5 and a 5.0 fat and about a 3.4 to 3.6 protein. So we strive for maximum production.
So continuing in the production is your herd size and your beef production. And this is your energy inputs from just on dairy inputs, not dealing with crop production. How much crops you produce yourself, and then they plug this into the program based on the life cycle assessment of the 500 farms to estimate your inputs to raise your crops. And looks at your feed ration. Like we talked about before, this is an intensive grazing unit, so that plays a big role into this. And then percentage of dry matter intake in the feed ration. And also how your manure is managed, and they have one system which is that liquid slurry pond. So here are the actual results from Piedmont Jerseys. Surprisingly, we found that the feed production energy use was quite high, and we were surprised with that being a grazing herd. So we dug into that in a little bit of research, and it's due to upstream energies associated with pasture. So they associate the nitrogen that you'd have to put on the pasture and the lime that you would also have to put on the pasture. So it's upstream assumptions made about that area and pasture in general. But we can see that the fuel use is lower than the national and the regional average. Now, like I said before, this is an estimate of your farm. Corey, do you think that this totally grasps how you manage your pastures?
Like Drew, I was real surprised at this number, and I talked to the guy that worked on the formula, but they were assuming doing a lot more liming and fertility than we actually do. We do GPS soil sampling on our farm every year, and we're only having to apply lime about every 3 years, and we maintain a 6.5 pH on our soil. So I'm not sure in my case that this is very accurate as far as what we're doing on our farm, but this was kind of surprising to me. So.
But on greenhouse gas emissions, we can see that Piedmont was lower than the regional average by 0.21, and also lower than the national average by 0.09. So this is a positive story for Piedmont, and we think for the Jersey breed. So Corey, were you happy to see this, and do you think maybe down the line, if you would go value added, this would be something that consumers would be interested in?
Yeah, I think so. You know, today's consumer wants to know as much about their food as possible. And I think this ties right in with the information they want. You know, they want to know you're doing a good job and using as little energy as possible to produce food. So that's why we were interested in doing this study.
I think that just showing that you're conscious of it goes a long way with consumers, that you're participating in these type of programs. So this environmental stewardship program is completely voluntary, and it is available to any co-op or producer that belongs to the farm program. So you can contact your representative from your co-op and ask for this evaluation. If you do not belong to a co-op that is part of the farm program, you can sign up as an independent producer and get that survey done. I'm actually a certified animal care evaluator, and to our Jersey members, we would be providing the service to our members. So I thank you for your time, and we'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Drew. Drew will be available after the program and can give you more information. You also have a book here.
I do have pamphlets for anyone that's interested.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a picture of our family shortly after we started the dairy there in Lincoln County. And next I would like to bring up James and Alleviate, and they're going to talk a little bit about what we've got planned for the future. While they're coming up, the picture on the right is a picture of James's wedding. The one on my right is Olivia receiving her master's, and the bottom corner is our first, but hopefully not our last grandson, Luke.
Just 1 year old.
Just 1 year old, yes.
Okay, before we talk about our succession plan, over the past year, we've been working with our ag lawyer to try to transition the farm to the next generation. We've been trying to get our farm put into an LLC. We've also been working with our local land conservancy. In doing so, we're going to apply for a conservation easement. With this easement, we'll not only preserve the land for the future and keeping it farm use for next generations to come, but also we'd like to use the funds for a value-added project with the processing plant. And to talk a little bit more on that, I'll let Alleviate.
Hi, everyone. As my brother alluded to, we have been in the process of working on a value-added on-farm processing plant. This was not an easy process. It was very tedious, and it's taken a long time. I think that we started research 5 years ago. It initially started with talking with extension agents, some of which were in the room, and they've been very helpful, and then also with former and current processing plant owners and operators, and as well as farm owners as well. And so basically what we were able to do is use these resources to get in touch with the right people. So it was there that we were introduced to grant writers who were able to apply for grants on our behalf through the United States Department of Agriculture for a planning grant first, which consisted of anywhere up to $80,000 that you can utilize to look at the market in your region, if people are interested in on-farm processing plants, as far as buying your products, looks at the budgets of that as well as if it's going to be feasible for you. And then moving on from that, the second year, which would have been this past year, we applied for a working capital grant. And so that's going to allow us, hopefully as long as we get it, which we should hopefully find out sometime next year, to be able to utilize funds as a way to start up this actual farm processing plant. So regardless, our goal is to essentially take on that next generation into that part of the farm with the processing plant. And the way that kind of even started out was because, as you know, we milk about 220 cows, but we were not looking to get any bigger. But for our farm to be able to sustain not only my brother or my sister or my family, we would be need to add something different. So essentially that's the reason this all came about, and it all goes back to our passion for not only the dairy industry, but our Jersey cows and being able to provide a nutritious product for our consumers and then educating them as well about it. So hopefully we get that, and that's kind of it. That's where we're at now.
As we've alluded to, I've had a passion for showing ever since I was a little kid, and we've exhibited at Louisville for probably the last 20 years consecutively. And our family, starting with my dad, has exhibited our North Carolina State Fair for over 80 years consecutively. So we have a real passion for jerseys and a real passion for showing, but you know, we're a small dairy and we don't have any other outside income, so we've got to breed cows that we can show, but also give a lot of milk. So because they've got to make, you know, they've got to make a profit at home. So all my kids showed when they were growing up, and showing's one thing that makes all the hard work worthwhile for me. But we'll talk about a few of the families I want to talk about. This is a cow that I actually purchased before I ever started out on my own. She ended up being the winning milking senior yearling at Louisville, and still have a lot of family members of this cow in the herd. And they are all owned by my wife, Bridget, now. The next cow that I want to mention is a Valentino daughter that this is a picture of her as a 2-year-old. She'll actually be a 3-year-old this year and is entered in the Jersey Jug. So hopefully everything goes well. We'll have her in the jug in Louisville here in a couple weeks. I can trace this cow family back to probably the early 30s. I went on Jersey's family tree and traced this cow back to a herd bull that I remember my dad talking about that they used many, many years ago. So a lot of these cow families have been in our herd for many generations. The next cow is this is another Valentino daughter that was actually in the jug last year. She ended up 6th in the jug last year, and we'll probably be showing her again as a 4-year-old this year. So I've got several daughters out of this cow. One of them has already scored 88 as a 2-year-old. So part of our breeding program is I don't really look at high JPI numbers as much as I look at udder index and milk and type. Our goal is to breed cows that'll last for a long time, because in our herd, you know, every extra lactation I get out of a cow, that's another offspring that potentially I have to sell for dairy replacement. So we've made a lot of our money over the years that went back into the farm has been from the sale of dairy replacement. So one thing good about Jerseys is if you do a good job with calves with Jerseys, you've got a lot of replacements to sell, unless you're expanding your herd. So that's been one of our goals.
So tell us what the average age of the milking herd is?
Average age of our milking herd now is probably 5 to 6 lactations. We typically sell 50 to 60% of our heifer crop every year. A lot through regional sales, but a lot through private sales here lately. But and one thing I like about the showing, it really gets your name out there and creates some demand for your replacements.
Okay. So we're at the point of your questions for this crew, and Drew will grab the handheld mic here and walk down through and anybody can be asked a question. So are there questions, or what are your questions?
Before we start that, I would like to thank Jersey for sponsoring us for this, and also North Carolina Dairy Advantage. They did help with some of our expenses to come out here, and really appreciate them nominating us for this virtual farm tour.
Our pleasure. Questions right here.
If you go and look at your diagram on where the energy is going, can you segment it into what those big blocks are? I'm surprised that your energy rating is as high as it is. It doesn't look like you've got that big of mechanical operation, and so I'm not sure why those numbers should be so high.
So the green bar, which was the high bar, was attributed to energy use associated with your feed production. So that was a lot of upstream assumptions in the program. The blue bar was actually smaller than the national and the regional average, and that was associated with fuel use.
What are the assumptions then going into that upside part of the analysis?
It was due to maintaining pasture in general and in that region in particular. So the high amounts of nitrogen and lime that you'd be putting on these pastures have upstream energy associated with them. The model does.
I'm not sure that model is accurate for our area, but
It may not be exact for this farm. It's just that's how it was done in the life cycle assessment, and it is what it is. I can talk more.
We got one right straight in front of you. There you go.
I was wondering about your lanes for the pastures. You said you try and keep them in good shape so the cows are out of the mud. So you said something about sand and like gravel, and how does that work?
yeah, those lanes were actually, when we started the dairy, we got some cost share money through soil and water conservation. So they had a template of how to construct these lanes. So those lanes were dug out, and there's a geotextile material or filter cloth is put down first. Then we put about 6 to 8 inches of crush and run gravel. And the sand is, our cows spend so much time walking on those to try to alleviate having stone bruises and stuff. We try to keep about 2 inches of sand on there just for the comfort of the cattle. But they do take some maintenance. If you get heavy rains, you know, you'll have some places to wash out. So me and James probably spend about twice a year we have to go through and maintain, add some gravel in places and put the sand back. A lot of times that sand will wash off, but it's amazing. We can put a new layer of sand on those stock trails and it'll cut 15 minutes off of how long it takes the cows to go from the barn to the furthest paddock. So it helps.
Does your milk go to a specialty plant, like for cheese production or something, because it's Jersey milk?
Unfortunately, right now, of course, our federal order is on fat skim. Our milk is right now going to a plant in Asheville, Milko, and they mostly provide milk to Ingalls stores. And that's why there's not a lot of Jersey milk available in our area. So that's why we're thinking ice cream and milk is going to be a good fit for us if we're going to do on-farm processing.
You're also located fairly close to some major metropolitan areas, correct?
We are. We're only about 40 miles from Charlotte, about 15 miles from Gastonia, about 5 miles from Lincolnton, and about 10 miles from Hickory. So we've got a big population base around us. So we're hoping, you know, we've got plenty of market there if we can just get a product and get it out there to them.
What percentage of your milk do you think you're going to process?
Of course, it's going to start out eventually, depending on the market. I'll be honest with you, I'm really lucky in that I'm an independent producer, and I have talked to my marketing organization, and they're willing, as long as I can work it out with hauling, as long as the haulers will pick me up, they'll take my milk just like they're taking it now. So ideally, it's going to be great for me to still use them to balance, because that's, when you get into on-farm processing, one of your issues is balancing milk. So I'm not going to be in a rush to get to 100%, but you know, we want to ramp it up as much as we can, and hopefully we'll find that sweet spot where, you know, they're still picking up what we don't process, but we're processing enough to make the whole system work.
Other questions? Corey, anything that as you now look back upon the last 45 minutes and what we've gone through that you might like to go back or mention again? New points, something we missed going into this?
I can't think of anything in particular. Like I say, and I mentioned this before, but you know, part of this grazing system comes from, you know, cows on total confinement typically don't last as long as I like them to stay in the herd. So this whole system is really good for cow longevity. I think this is gonna, if we're gonna do on-farm marketing, that's gonna be a big plus for us going forward as far as cow comfort. And, you know, cows naturally been out on pasture. You know, any young guy, you know, that wants to get into the dairy business, this is a pretty low-cost way to get in. You spend a lot less money on facilities, a lot less money maintaining facilities, since you don't have to maintain freestalls and that kind of thing. So it can work. You got to be dedicated to it, though. It's a little more management technique than a TMR herd, because you're constantly adjusting your ration and trying to figure out, you know, how much grass to give them and that kind of thing. But
Okay. Well, before we leave the program today, I want to say a couple of thanks here and give some credits. That drone video, which I hope you saw on Facebook, and if you didn't, it is out there, and that we saw again here today, was done by Ben Farmer, from a friend of Olivia's, Wilkesboro, North Carolina, okay. The opening credits go to Sudia for that. And then, I tell you what, that just is about the cutest darn picture that I've ever seen. This was done on Luke's first birthday at the farm, right?
his first birthday pictures, his first birthday's coming up later this month.
Okay, and Christina Elmore, is the photographer, I think. Shutterwood Photography. So, and lots of folks have contributed to the program today, and we wanted to make sure that they got credit for that. So, in conclusion, we want to thank you for coming. You guys, please stand up, and let's give them a huge round of applause. Corey will be available for about 10 more minutes here in the